Welcome to Incognito Islamic Productions.
So this is something that happened a couple of weeks ago. I was sitting with some respected brothers, mashallah, very good, knowledgeable brothers, and they were telling me about this issue where they wanted to have, different kinds of panel events, and they were getting a lot of criticism. And in fact, they were being boycotted by a group of loud, obnoxious feminists online who thought that having an all-male panel is somehow inherently unjust. It's somehow inherently unfair. It's something that should never happen. There should never be an all-male panel. And so they attacked this group, and they attacked these brothers. And they told me their response, how they responded to these activists and feminists who are attacking them. They said, well, if we only, we tried reaching out to some knowledgeable sisters. If there was a sister who was knowledgeable on this specific issue that we were going to have a panel on, then of course we would have invited her or them. And, this is our bad. Next time, inshallah, we're going to try better. And so it was it was more of an apologetic response. And I don't blame them for that kind of response, in the sense that they were trying their best in that kind of difficult situation. But what I encourage them to do in the future is, instead of answering in that kind of way when you're criticized for an all-male panel, instead say this. Say, why does every panel have to include women? Why is an all-male panel so inherently wrong? What in Islam requires such a thing, that there has to be a female in every single panel, on every single venue, opportunity to address the community? There has to be a woman representative. Why? Where is this coming from? Please explain why a panel that consists of all men is inherently illegitimate just because there's not a female body on it. So this is the response that I think we need to be giving whenever feminists start criticizing and attacking our panels and our conferences and our masajid, just because there aren't females present on those at those venues. And the reason that I give in the article is I just mentioned, what does this mindset lead to? Where does this mindset that we have to have women on every single panel, what is the implication of that kind of logic? Where does that logic lead? Okay. So put aside the question of where in our tradition do we have this kind of requirement? Where in Islam? Where did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where did Allah in the Quran say that there has to be, this quote unquote female representation? You won't find it. So let's just put that question aside. And let's think about, where does this logic lead? What are the implications of having a problem with all male panels? And the implication that I tried to draw in this article is that if you have a problem with all male panels for the simple fact that there's not a female present, then you'll have to have a problem with, for example, the khulafa, right? All of the caliphs of Islam were male. All the rightly guided caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, they were men, right? There's no female caliph. So if you have a problem with all male panels, you have a problem with the lack of female representation, then you also have to attack the khulafa. And some feminists do attack the khulafa, right? What about the founders of the madhahib? The founders of the madhahib, Sunni schools of thought, all men. What about the transmitters of the different qira'at of the Quran? All men. What about the compilers of the 6 Sahih books of Hadith? All men. Okay? All the schools of Kalam were founded by men, and so on and so forth. Right? So if you have a problem with all male panels, you have a problem with the lack of female representation, all of these things within the time of the Prophet ﷺ, within the time of the Prophet ﷺ, afterwards in the time of the Salaf, afterwards in the time of the Khalaf with all the scholars of Islam, you're going to have a problem with all of these things. That's the implication. And this is why I've referred to in other places as the slippery slope, the path to apostasy that feminists are on, because they have this idea of the necessity of female representation in a very specific way. Right now, you're going to have a problem with the masjid. You're going to have a problem with the fact that this Islamic conference doesn't have a female representative on the panel. That's the first step. The second step is, okay, well, that's my standard for what constitutes a just panel or a just representation of Islam and so forth. Then, okay, then I'm going to have a problem with the scholarly tradition. I'm going to have a problem with the madhahib in fiqh. I'm going to have a problem with all of the Islamic sciences. I'm going to have a problem with the Salaf. I'm going to have a problem with the Sahaba. Then eventually you're going to have a problem with the Prophet ﷺ himself. Why? Because the last messenger to humanity, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was a man. He didn't have there wasn't a female messenger alongside him. Allah didn't send a male and a female messenger at the same time. He only sent the Prophet ﷺ, a male. So if you adopt the feminist, this feminist mentality, even if you don't call it a feminist mentality, because there's some people who will say, oh, I'm not a feminist, but I think we have to have female representation. Okay, you're not calling it feminism, but that's where the idea came from. Like I said, what is the source of that idea? What is the source of that value? You're not going to find it in Islam. So that's a feminist idea. If you take that feminist idea and you run with it and you apply and you take it to its logical conclusion, then the logical conclusion is that Allah was unjust. Well, na'udhu billah from that kind of thought, but that's the kind of implication, that there's injustice, that the last messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was a man and there was no female representative alongside him. Okay. So that's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the logical conclusion, the logical implication. If we take this idea, where does it lead? Because that's where people are going to be led. That's the path that they're going to. And that's why you have some of these Muslim feminists who have gone into the area and the domain of kufr, outright kufr. They'll say things like, they'll start insulting the Anbiya. Okay. And we know one prominent example. She's not the only example, but Amina Wadud, right? She is the one who is insulting Ibrahim alayhi salam and calling him vile, ugly names. So how did she get to that point? Well, that point makes perfect logical sense if you think that female representation has to be XYZ. Okay? So another example, Al-Ashara Al-Mubasharin Bil Jannah. The ones that have been promised or who have been given the glad tidings of Jannah amongst the Sahaba. And the hadith, the 10 that are referenced are all men. They're all men. Now that's not to say that there weren't female companions who were promised Jannah or given the glad tidings of Jannah. There were, of course, Khadija, our mother Khadija radiallahu anha, others. So this is something that, yes, there are female who were promised Jannah or were given the glad tidings of Jannah by the Prophet ﷺ. But why in that particular hadith, or why in that group of 10, why isn't there any female representation? Why isn't there any female representation there? So this is something that we have to try to understand and get out of this kind of feminist mindset.